On March 30th, 1981, 30 years ago, President Ronald Reagan, only 2 months into his first term, was almost assassinated by John Hinckley Jr., who also shot and wounded 3 others. And now, award-winning Washington Post reporter Quentin Wilber is out with a new fascinating book about it. It's entitled Rawhide Down, and it's getting praised to the hilt by everybody, including Bob Woodward and George F. Will. And he's here now to talk with us about it. Congratulations on the book, Del.
Thanks, Ashley. I really appreciate being here.
As you were in the process of writing the book, what did you learn that you didn't already know or were surprised by, or that Americans in general didn't already know?
Well, you know, the whole book actually was a surprise to me because after 30 years, I interviewed 125 people and I got all these records no one had ever seen before. When you start piecing this all together, you realize like everything you kind of think you know about this day, you really don't know and you can't really appreciate. For example, we kind of knew Reagan almost died. And a bullet was lodged an inch from his heart. He lost more than half his blood. But I don't think you really understand that moment or really can comprehend it till you're in the operating room with a 31-year-old surgical intern who hasn't been screened by anyone, and he's holding Reagan's beating heart in his hand as another surgeon hunts for his bullet. And this room, by the way, is surrounded by Secret Service agents. And I don't think you really appreciate the dire nature of everything that happened until you set the scene of March 30th, 1981 at 2:27 p.m. precisely, when Ronald Reagan left the Washington Hilton to walk towards his waiting limousine. And there in the crowd, as you said, was John Hinckley with a gun in his right pocket, a .22 caliber revolver. 15 feet from Reagan, he pulls it out and shoots 6 shots in 1.7 seconds. The first shot hits James Brady. The second shot hits Tom Delahanty, a D.C. police officer. They fall to the ground. The way to Reagan's clear. Jerry Parr, a 50-year-old Secret Service agent, is already reacting in 0.4 of a second to get Reagan behind that armored door and into that door of that limousine. The third shot Hinckley shoots goes high, and Hinckley had an effective range of about 20 to 30 feet at stationary targets, so he just misses. The fourth shot, Tim McCarthy, the Secret Service agent by the door, swiveled and took it right in his chest. He falls to the ground as they flash behind him. The fifth shot hits the bulletproof window as they flash behind that, and the sixth shot cracked across the driveway. That bullet got smashed into a size of a dime, slipped through an 1.5 inch gap between the door and the doorframe, and struck Reagan in the left chest. And now this is where I'm getting at what surprised me. When you really analyze that moment and you really think about it, Jerry Parr saved Reagan's life in these split-second decisions. Hinckley had an effective shooting range, as I said before, 20 to 30 feet at stationary targets. He doesn't get that chance because Parr reacted so quickly. Secondly, if Jerry Parr is a split second slower, just a split second, if you follow the trajectory of the bullet, it hits Ronald Reagan in the head. Anyway, so they get in the car, they tumble in there, they fall down, they take off. And I don't know, Ashley, if you've been to D.C., I'm sure you've been stuck in the traffic of a presidential motorcade before. Well, I'll tell you what, this limousine, you left everything behind. That limousine was alone on Connecticut Avenue heading back to the White House, alone, just taking off. And Jerry Parr's in that back seat and he's checking out Ronald Reagan, looking for blood, doesn't find nothing wrong with him. He looks out that window, sees 3 bodies down, he sees a bullet mark in the left window, and he realizes, oh my God, this is an assassination attempt, This could be a decapitation strike, he doesn't know. And Reagan seems like he's okay, and so Jerry Parr gets on the radio and says, Rawhide is okay. Rawhide is okay. And Rawhide is Reagan's Secret Service code name, and that's where I got the title of the book, Rawhide Down, because I think if there's any day where Reagan's Rawhide-esque, it's this one. And so they're taking off, and about 30 seconds later, Ronald Reagan starts having trouble breathing, his face turns ashen, there's frothy blood in his lips, and Jerry Parr realizes that's a problem. He probably injured a lung, maybe he broke a rib and punctured a lung. That's a serious, serious injury. But he has a decision to make. If the world's really at war, if there's really other assassins lurking about, this is a decapitation strike. Remember, the assassin's already shot 3 guys. They're laying on the sidewalk, so he's pretty effective. That Jerry Parr, the smart thing for him to do is go to the White House. But instead, he diverts to the hospital because something tells him Reagan's in dire situation. Reagan had actually pocketed a napkin from the hotel after giving this speech. He had just delivered a speech at the hotel to a trade union. And he had, dabbed his lips in its bright, frothy blood. And to Parr, that signaled, oh my gosh, he's in trouble. It's oxygenated. It's probably coming from a lung. They divert to the hospital. Reagan, of course, insists on walking in through the doors. He gets in and he collapses, just like that. I interviewed a paramedic. This is how you know how dire the situation is. The paramedic watches Reagan. The eyes roll in the back of the president's head. He falls to the ground. That paramedic, who's very experienced, thinks, oh my God, he's Code City, meaning he's not going to make it in paramedic speak.
Right.
And so what I didn't really fully understand was that actually in those 3 minutes of time, and actually about a minute and a half, Jerry Parr didn't save the president's life once; he saved it twice. And
All
so
right.
that's one of the surprises that came about.
From what you've been able to learn, when did President Reagan, whose code name was Rawhide, as you mentioned, know that he had been shot? We heard at first he didn't know.
No, he didn't know. In fact, no one knew he'd been shot. He goes in he gets in the emergency room, he collapses, they throw him on a gurney, they pump him full of fluids, and a doctor's checking, he doesn't get good breath sounds on the left side. And this is a moment of sheer tension in the emergency room. The nurses' hands are shaking as they're trying to get life-saving IVs into him. It's like, one is thinking back to John F. Kennedy's death. She's having a flashback. Reagan looks like he's going to die. They're all convinced he's not going to make it. They pump him full of fluids, and after they kind of stabilize him a bit, they check his side, and they find that little slit from the bullet mark. It's weird. The bullet hit him like a saw, like the sharp side of the saw. Tiny little bullet slipped there, nicked the rib, and tumbled through and chewed up a lot of tissue in his lung. And it lodged just an inch from his heart.
And through all that, as bad of shape as he was in, through the oxygen mask, he looks up through Jerry Parr, according to your book, and says, "I hope they're all Republicans." Now, what does that say about the character of a man in terrible physical condition as he was at that moment, trying to make other people laugh?
I got to tell you something. When I got into this book, I was kind of nervous about approaching Ronald Reagan, an historic figure, and I kind of worked it out to be kind of revolving around Reagan, but not really about Reagan. And as I got more and more into it, the more impressed I became with Ronald Reagan. I mean, exactly what you just said. Here's this guy. They've now inserted a chest tube into his side, by the way, and blood is pouring out. And he sees his wife, Nancy Reagan. She finally gets here, and the first thing he says to her is, "Honey, I forgot to duck." It's not, "Oh my God, I'm crying." No one can believe he has this poise. He's obviously nervous about his condition. He's saying, "I can't breathe." I've never felt suffocation before, but it's evidently a terrifying fear, and that's what he was feeling because his lung was filled with blood. But he still cracks his jokes. He sees Baker, Meese, and Deaver, his three top advisors, later. He says, "Who's minding the store?" I mean, who does that kind of thing? I mean, and so then, what you just mentioned, "I hope you're all Republicans," and he goes to the operating room, and this is a great story that is vintage Ronald Reagan. He goes to the operating room. He's in the operating room. He gets up on one shoulder, pulls off the oxygen mask, and says, "I hope you're all Republicans," to the doctors. And everyone laughs. Okay, he's right before surgery. He said this thing. It's great. He'd actually tested that line out in the emergency room 20 minutes earlier.
You mentioned Nancy Reagan before. How was her composure through all this, and how did this affect her?
Oh, this was a very traumatic day for her. I mean, it still shakes her up to talk about it. She hears about the shooting from a Secret Service agent, and she rushes to the hospital to be with her husband. And as they're driving there, they get stuck in traffic. And she's grabbing the shoulders of this agent, George Opfer, from the back seat to the front seat, shaking him, saying, "Let me out, George. I'm going to walk. I have to get there. I just have to get there." And when she gets there, she runs into Mike Deaver, their close aide, and she says, "They have to let me see him. They don't know how it is with us." Because, Ronald Reagan, the closest person in his life ever was Nancy Reagan, and vice versa. And, you can only imagine the trauma that she went through on this day.
Everybody you've talked to, what did they tell you about how the assassination attempt affected the Reagan presidency?
What this shooting did is, people didn't immediately come to Reagan because, "Oh, we feel bad he's been shot." What his actions that day, his heroism, his jokes in the face of death, really revealed his inner character to the American people. Remember, Ronald Reagan had a very scripted presidency, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, but his presidency was laid out perfectly, what to do, when to do it, and he liked it that way because he's a former actor and he was running the show. But on this day, there was no script. There was no directions to follow, and the American people got to see the true Reagan without any filter. And they liked what they saw. And I think this later helped him, as David Broder, the late political columnist, probably the best political columnist of his generation, told me, this day made Reagan a mythic figure, and it really helped him later in his two terms.
Again, the name of the book, Rawhide Down. Quentin Wilber, the author. Very compelling reading. When you start it, you won't be able to put it down, I can guarantee you. And thank you very much, and good luck.
Thanks, Ashley.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.